Well, howdy, folks. Good evening to all of you. Glad you're here. I see a few new faces, and that's good. And I see some old regulars, and that's real good too. Good stories tonight, so it's a good thing you're here. Don't want to miss this one. Well, Ginger did some digging around, and darned if she didn't find another part of the story. Max Brand wrote it, and it is about the Untamed. In fact, it's a continuation by the name of Trailin' the Night Horseman. It's all written about the same point in time, 1920, so it's a little different, but it's a good old Western, and I think you're going to enjoy it. So find yourself a place to sit, and get all snuggled in, and enjoy the fire, because we're going to start on this story right now with Chapter 1, The Night Horseman, the Scholar. At the age of 6, Randall Byron could name and bound just about every state in the Union and give the date of its admission to the Union. At 9, he was a conversant in the Homeric Greek and Caesar. At 12, he read Aristophanes and with perfect understanding of the illusion of the day and divided his leisure between Ovid and Horace. At 15, wearied by the simplicity of Old English and the 13th century Italian, he dipped into the history of philosophy and passed from that, naturally, into calculus and the higher mathematics. At 18, he took an A.B. from Harvard, and while idling away a pleasant summer with Hebrew and Sanskrit, he delved lightly into biology and its kindred sciences, having reached the conclusion that truth is greater than goodness or beauty, because it comprises both, and the whole is greater than any of its parts. At 21, he pocketed his Ph.D. and was touched with the fever of his first practical enthusiasm, surgery. At 24, he was an M.D. and a distinguished diagnostician, though he preferred work in his laboratory in his endeavor to resolve the elements into simpler forms. Also, he published at this time a work on anthropology, whose circulation was limited to 200 copies, and he received in return 200 letters of congratulations from great men who had tried to read this book. At 27, he collapsed one fine spring day on the floor of his laboratory. That afternoon, he was carried into the presence of a great physician who was also a very vulgar man. The great physician felt his pulse and looked into his dim eyes. "You have 120 horsepower brain and a runabout body," said the great physician. "I have come," answered Randall Bryan faintly, "for the solution of a problem, not for the statement thereof." "I'm not through," said the great physician. "Among other things, you're a damned fool." Randall Byron rubbed his eyes. "What steps do you suggest that I consider?" he queried. The great physician spat noisily. "Marry a farmer's daughter," he said brutally. "But," said Randall Byron vaguely. "I'm a busy man, and you've wasted 10 minutes of my time," said the great physician, turning back to his plate glass window. "My secretary will send you a bill for $1,000. Good day." And therefore, 10 days later, Randall Byron sat in his room in the hotel at Elkhead. He had just written to his friend Swimmerton Longbourn, M.A., Ph.D., LL.D., in controversially, "The introduction of the personal equation leads to lamentable inversions, and the perceptible facilities with contemplating phenomena through the lens of ego too often conceive an accidental connotation or manifest distortion to be actuality. For the physical, or personal, too often be clouds that power of inner vision which so unerringly penetrates to the inherent truths of incorporeity and the external mundane. Yet this problem, to your eyes, I fear, holds for my contemplative faculties an extraordinary fascination, to wit, wherein does the mind, in itself a muscle, escape from the laws of the physical, and wherein and wherefore do the laws of the physical exercise so inexorable a jurisdiction over the processes of the mind, so that a disorder of the visual nerve actually distorts the ostomus and veils the pneumatosis. Your pardon, dear Longbourn, for these lapses from the general to the particularly, but in a lighter moment of idleness, I pray you give some careless thought to a problem now painfully my own, though rooted inevitably so deeply in the dirt of the commonplace. But you have asked me in a letter of recent date for that particularly physical aspects of my present environment. And though, as you know so well, it is my conviction that the physical fact is not, and only the immaterial is, yet I shall gladly look about me, a thing I have not yet seen occasion to do, and describe to you the details of my present condition. Accordingly, to this point, Randall Byron removed from his nose his thick glasses, and holding them poised, he stared through the window at his view. He had quite changed his appearance by removing the spectacles, for the owlish touch was gone, and he seemed at a stroke 10 years younger. It was such a face as one is glad to examine in detail, lean, pale, the transparent skin stretched tightly over cheekbone, nose, and skin. That skin was built on good fighting lines, though somewhat overdelicate in substance, and the mouth quite colorless. But oddly enough, the upper lip had that habitual appearance of stiff compression, which is characteristic of highly strung individuals. It is a noticeable feature of nearly every great actor, for instance. The nose was straight, very thin, and in a strong sidelight, a tracery of the red blood showed through the nostrils. The eyes were deeply buried and the lower lids bruised with purple. Weak eyes that blinked at a change of light or a sudden thought. Distant eyes which missed the design of wallpaper and saw the trees growing on the mountains. Pyramidal, swelling largely towards the top and divided in the center into two distinct lobes by a single marked furrow, which gave its expression a hint of the wistful. Looking at that forehead, one was strangely conscious of the brain beneath. There seemed no bony structure. The mind, undefended, was growing and pushing the confining walls farther out. And the fragility which the head suggested the body confirmed. For he was not framed to labor. The burden of his noble head had bowed the slender throat and crooked the shoulders, and when he moved his arms, it seems the arms of a skeleton too loosely clad. There was differing connotations to the hands, to be sure. They were thin, bones and sinew chiefly, and the violet of the veins showed along the backs. But they were active hands without tremor, hands ideal for the accurate scalpel where a fractional error means death to the helpless. After a moment of staring through the window, the scholar wrote again. The major portion of Elkhead lies within plain sight of my window. I see a general merchandise store, 27 buildings of a comparatively major and 11 of a minor significant, and 5 saloons. The streets, however, were not described at that sitting, for at this juncture a heavy hand knocked, and the door of Randall Byron's room was flung open by Hank Dwight, proprietor of Elkhead's saloon, a versatile man, expert behind the bar or in a blacksmith shop. "Doc," said Hank Dwight, "you're wanted." Randall Byron placed his spectacles more firmly on his nose to consider his host. "What?" he began, but Hank Dwight had already turned on his heel. "Her name is Kate Cumberland. A little speed, Doc. She's in a hurry." "If no other physician is available," protested Byron, following slowly down the stairs, "I suppose I must see her." "If they was another within 10 miles, do you suppose I'd call on you?" said Hank Dwight. So saying, he led the way out onto the veranda, where the doctor was aware of a girl in a riding skirt, who stood with one gloved hand on her hip, while the other slapped a quirt idly against her riding boots. Chapter 2. "Here's a gent that calls himself a doc," said Hank Dwight by way of introduction. "If you can use him, Miss Cumberland, fly to it." And he left him alone. Now the sun lay directly behind Kate Cumberland, and in order to look at her closely, the doctor had to shade his weak eyes and pucker his brows. For from beneath her wide sombrero there rolled a cloud of golden hair as bright as the sunshine itself, a sad strain upon the visual nerve of Dr. Randall Byron. He repeated her name, bowed, then he straightened and blinked again. As if she appreciated the strain upon his eyes, she stepped closer and entered the shadow. "Dr. Hardin is not in town," she said, "and I have to bring a physician out to the ranch at once. My father is critically ill." Randall Byron rubbed his lean chin. "I am not practicing at present," he said reluctantly. Then he saw that she was watching him closely, weighing him with her eyes, and it came to the mind of Randall Byron that he was not a large man and might not incline the scale far from the horizontal. "I'm hardly equipped," began Byron. "You will not need equipment," she interrupted. "His trouble lies in his nerves and the state of his mind." A slight gleam lighted the eyes of the doctor. "Ah," he murmured, "the mind?" "Yes." He rubbed his bloodless hands slowly together, and when he spoke, his voice was sharp and quick and wholly impersonal. "Tell me the symptoms." "Can't we talk over those on the way to the ranch? Even if we start now, it'll be dark before we arrive." "But," protested the doctor, "I have yet not decided. This precipitancy—" "Oh," she said, and flushed. He perceived that she was on the verge of turning away, but something withheld her. "There is no other physician within reach. My father is very ill. I only ask that you come as a diagnostician, doctor." "But a ride to your ranch," he said miserably. I presume you refer to riding a horse?" "Naturally." "I am unfamiliar with that means of locomotion," said the doctor with serious eyes, "and in fact have not carried my acquaintance with the equine species beyond a purely experimental stage. Anatomically, I have a superficial knowledge, but on the one occasion on which I sat a saddle, I observed that the docility of the horse is probably a poetic fallacy." He rubbed his left shoulder thoughtfully and saw a slight tremor at the corners of the girl's mouth. It caused his vision to clear and he concentrate. He found that the lips were, in fact, in the very act of smiling. The face of the doctor brightened. "You shall ride my own horse," said the girl. "She is perfectly gentile and has a very easy gait. I'm sure you will not have the slightest trouble with her." "And you?" "I'll find something about town. It doesn't matter what." "This," said the doctor, "is most remarkable. You choose your mounts at random?" "But you will go?" she insisted. "Ah, yes, the trip to the ranch," groaned the doctor. "Let me see. The physical obstacles such a trip, while many are not altogether insuperable, I may say. In the meantime, the moral urge which compels me towards the ranch seems to be of the first order." He sighed. "Is it not strange, Miss Cumberland, that man, though distinguished from the lower orders by mind, so often is controlled in his actions by ethical impulses which override the considerations of reason? An observation which leads us towards the conclusion that the passion for goodness is a principle hardly secondary to the passions for truth. Understand that I built the hypothesis, only tentatively, with many reservations, among which—" He broke off short. The smile was growing upon her lips. "I will put together a few of my things," said the doctor, "and come down to you at once." "Good," said the girl. "I'll be waiting for you with 2 horses before you are ready." He turned away, but had hardly taken a step before he turned, saying, "But why are you so sure that you will be ready before I—" But she was already down the steps from the veranda and stepping briskly down the street. "There is an element of the unexplainable in a woman," said the doctor, and assumed his way to his room. Once there, something prompted him to act with the greatest possible speed. He tossed his toilet articles and a few changes of linen into a small, flexible valise and ran down the stairs. He reached the veranda again, panting, and the girl was not in sight. A smile of triumph appeared on the grave, colorless lips of the doctor. Feminine instincts, however, is not infallible, he observed to himself, and to one of the cowboys, lounging loosely in a chair nearby. He continued his train of thoughts aloud. Though the verity of the feminine intuition has already been thrown into a shade of doubt by many thinkers, as you will undoubtedly agree, the man thus addressed allowed his lower jaw to drop. But after a moment, he postulated, "Now what in hell do you mean by that?" The doctor already turned away, intent upon his thoughts, but he now paused and again faced the cowboy. He said, frowning, There is unnecessary violence in your remarks, sir. Duck your glasses, said the worthy in question. You ain't talking to a book, you're talking to a man. And in your attitude, went on the doctor, there is an element of offense which, if carried further, might be corrected by physical violence. I don't follow your words, said the cattleman, but from the drift of your tune, I gather you're a bit peeved. And if you are, his voice had risen to a ringing tone as he proceeded, and he now slipped from his chair and faced Randall Bryan, the big man, brown, hard-handed. The doctor crimsoned. Well, he echoed. In a place of deep ring, his words were pitched in a high squeak of defiance. He saw a large hand contract to a fist, but almost instantly the big man grinned and his eyes went past Byron. "Oh, hell," he grunted, and he turned his back with a chuckle. For an instant there was a mad impulse in the doctor to spring at this fellow, but a wave of impotence overwhelmed him. He knew that he was white around the mouth and there was a dryness in his throat. The excitement of imminent physical contest and personal danger, he diagnosed swiftly, causing acceleration of the pulse and attendant weakness of the body, a taste unworthy of the balanced intellect. Having brought back his poise by the quick introspection of reason, he went his way down the long veranda. Against a pillar leaned a tall cattleman, also brown and lean and hard. "May I inquire," he said, "if you have any information, direct or casual, concerning a family named Cumberland, which possesses ranch property in this vicinity?" "You may," said the cowpuncher, and continued to roll his cigarette. "Well," said the doctor, "do you know anything about them?" "Sure," said the other. Having finished his cigarette, he introduced it between his lips. It seemed to occur to him instantly, however, that he was committing an inhospitable breach, for he produced his Durham and brown papers with a start and extended them towards the doctor. "Smoke?" he asked. "I use tobacco in no form," said the doctor. The cowboy stared with such fixity that the match burned down in his fingertips and singed them before he had lighted his cigarette. "Is that a fact?" he queried, when his astonishment found utterance. "What do you do to kill time?" "Well, I've been thinking about knocking off this stuff for a while. Mame gets sore at me for having my fingers all stained up with nicotine like this." He extended his hand, the first and second fingers of which were painted a bright yellow. "Soap won't take it off," he remarked. "A popular but inexcusable error," said the doctor. "It is the tarry byproducts of tobacco which cause that stain. Nicotine itself, of course, is a volatile alkaloid base of which there is only the merest trace in tobacco. It is one of the deadliest of nerve poisons and is quite colorless. There is enough of that stain upon your fingers, if it were nicotine, to kill a dozen men." "The hell you say!" "Nevertheless, it is an inaudible fact. A lump of nicotine the size of the head of a pin placed on the tongue of a horse will kill the beast instantly." The cowpuncher pushed back his hat and scratched his head. "Well, this is worth knowing," he said, "but I'm some glad that Mame ain't heard it." "Concerning the Cumberlands," said the doctor, concerning the Cumberlands," repeated the cattleman. "It's best to leave 'em to their own concerns," and he started to turn away. But the thirst for knowledge was dry in the throat of the doctor. "Do I understand," he insisted, "that there is some mystery connected with them?" "From me," replied the other, "you understand nothing." And he lumbered down the steps and away. Be it understood that there was nothing of the gossip in Randall Byron. But now he was pardonably excited, and perceiving the tall form of Hank Dwight in the doorway, he approached his host. "Mr. Dwight," he said, "I am about to go to the Cumberland Ranch. I gather that there is something of an unusual nature concerning them?" "There is," admitted Hank Dwight. "Can you tell me what it is?" "I can." "Good," said the doctor, and he almost smiled. "It is always well to know the background of a case which has to do with mental states. Now, just what do you know?" "I know," began the proprietor, and then paused and eyed his guest dubiously. "I know," he continued, "a story." "Yes?" "Yes, about a man and a hoss and a dog." The approach seems not quite obvious, but I shall be glad to hear it. There was a pause. Words, said the host at length, is worse than bullets. You never know what they'll hit. But the story, persisted Randall Byron. That story, said Hank Dwight, I may tell to my son before I die. That sounds quite promising, but I'll tell no one else. Really. It's about a man and a hoss and a dog. The man ain't possible, the hoss ain't possible, and the dog is a wolf. He paused again and glowered on the doctor. He seemed to be drawn two ways, by his eagerness to tell a yarn and his dread of consequences. I know, he muttered, 'cause I've seen 'em all. He looked far, as though striking a silent bargain with himself concerning the sum of the story, which might safely be told. I've seen a hoss that understood a man's talk like you and me does, or better. I've heard a man whistle like a singing bird. Yep, that ain't no lie. You just imagine a bald eagle that could lick anything between the earth and the sky and was able to sing, and that's what that whistling was like. It made you glad to hear it, and it made you look to see if your gun was in good shape. It wasn't very loud, but it traveled pretty far, like it was coming from up above you. That's the way this strange man of the story whistles? Asked Byron, leaning closer. Man of the story? Echoed the proprietor with some warmth. Friend, if he ain't real, then I'm a ghost. And they's them in Elkhead that's got the scars of his coming and going. Ah, an outlaw, a gunfighter? Queried the doctor. Listen to me, son, observed the host, and to make his point, he tapped the hollow chest of Byron with his rigid forefinger. Around these parts, you know just as much as you see, and lots of times you don't even know that much. What you see is sometimes your business, but mostly it ain't, he concluded impressively. Words is worser than bullets. Well, mused Byron, I can ask the girl these questions. It will be medically necessary. Ask the girl? Ask her? Echoed the host with a sort of a horror, but he ended with a forced restraint. That's your business. Chapter 3. The Doctor Rides. Hank Dwight disappeared from the doorway, and the doctor was called from his ponderings by the voice of the girl. There was something about that voice which worried Byron, for it was low and controlled, musical, and did not fit with the nasal harshness of the cattleman. When she began to speak, it was like the beginning of a song. He turned now and found her sitting a tall bay horse, and she led a red roan mare beside her. When he went out, she tossed her reins over the head of her horse and strapped the valise behind her saddle. You won't have any trouble with that mare, she assured him when the time came for mounting. Yet, when he approached gingerly, he was received with flattened ears and a snort of anger. Wait, she cried, the left side, not the right. He felt the laughter in her voice, but when he looked, he could see no trace of it in her face. He approached from the left side, setting his teeth. You observe, he said, that I take your word at its full value, and placing his foot in the stirrup, he dragged himself gingerly up in the saddle. The mare stood like a rock. Adjusting himself, he wiped the sudden perspiration from his forehead. I quite believe, he remarked, that the animal is of unusual intelligence. All may yet be well. I'm sure of it, said the girl gravely. Now we're off. And the horses broke into a dog trot. Now the gait of the red roan mare was a dream of softness, and her flexible ankles gave a play of whole inches to break the jar of every step. And the sure sign of a good saddle horse, but the horse has never been saddled whose trot is really a smooth pace. The hat of Dr. Byron began to incline towards his right eye, and his spectacles toward his left ear. He felt a peculiar tightness in his stomach and heaviness in the heart. The trot, he ventured to his companion, is a damn. Dr. Byron, she cried. Whoa, called Dr. Byron, and he drew mightily in upon the reins. The red mare stopped as a ball stops when it meets a stout wall. The doctor sprawled along her neck, clinged with arms and legs. he managed to clamber back into the saddle. "There are vicious elements in this nature of this brute," he observed to the girl. "I'm very sorry," she murmured. He cast a sidelong glance, but found not a trace of a smile. "The word upon which I stopped," she suggested. "Stopped," he agreed, "was not, as you evidently assumed, an oath. On the contrary, I was merely remarking that the trot is a damaging gait, but through an interrupted articulation." His eyes dared her, but she was utterly grave. He perceived that there was, after all, a certain kinship between this woman of the mountain desert and the man thereof. Their silence was filled with eloquence. "We'll try a canter," she suggested, "and I think you'll find that easier." So she gave the word, and her bay sprang into a lope from a standing start. The red mare did likewise, nearly flinging the doctor over the back of the saddle. But by the grace of God, he clutched the pommel in time and was saved. The air caught Addie's face. They swept out of the town into a limitless level stretch. "Speed," gasped the doctor, "has never been a passion of mine." He noted that she was not moving in the saddle. The horse was like the bottom of a wave, swinging violently back and forth. She was the calm crest, swaying slightly and graciously with a motion as smooth as the flowing of water. And she spoke as evenly as if she were sitting in a rocking chair. "You'll be used to it in a moment," she assured him. He learned, indeed, that if one pressed the stirrups as the shoulders of the horse swung down and leaned a trifle forward when the shoulders rose again, the motion ceased to be jarring, for she was truly a matchless creature and gaited like one of those fabulous horses of old, sired by the swift western wind. In a little time, a certain pride went beating through the veins of the doctor. The air blew more deeply into his lungs. There was a different tang to the wind and a different feel to the sun, a peculiar richness of yellow warmth, and the small head of the horse and the short, sharp, pricking ears tossed continually. And now and then the mare threw her head a little to one side and glanced back at him with what he felt to be a reassuring air. Life and strength and speed were gripped between his knees. He flashed a glance at the girl. But she rode, with face straight forward, and there was that about her which made him turn his eyes suddenly away and look far off. It was a jagged country, for in the brief rainy season there came sudden and terrific downpours which lashed away the soil and scoured the face of the underlying rocks, and in a single day might cut a deep arroyo where before had been a smooth plain. This was the season of grass, but not the dark, rank green of rich soil and mild air. It was a kind of a yellowish green, a color at once tender and glowing. It spread everywhere across the plains about Elkhead, broken here and there by the projecting boulders which flashed in the sun. So a fresh battlefield might appear, pockmarked with shell holes and all the scars of war freshly cut upon its face. And in truth, the mountain desert was like an arena ready to stage a conflict, a titanic arena with space for earth giants to struggle. And there in the distance were the Spectator Mountains. High, lean-flanked mountains they were, not clad in forests, but rather bristling with a stubby growth of the few trees which might endure the precarious soil and bitter weather. But now they gathered the dignity of distance about them. The grass of the foothills was a faint green mist about their feet, cloaked of exquisite blue hung about the upper masses, but their heads were naked to the pale skies, and all day long the deliberate alteration, the garb of the mountains changed. When the sudden morning came, they leaped naked upon the eye, and then withdrew, muffling themselves in browns and blues until at nightfall they covered themselves so the eyes in thickly sheeted purple, Tyrian purple, and prepared for sleep with their heads among the stars. Something of all this came to Dr. Randall Byron as he rode, for it seemed to him that there was a similarity between these mountains and the girl beside him. She held that keen purity of the upper slopes under the sun, and though she had no artifice or careful wiles to make her strange, there was about her a natural dignity like the mystery of distance. There was a rhythm, too, about that line of peaks against the sky, and the girl had caught it. He watched her sway with the gallop of her horse, and felt that though she was so close at hand, She was 1,000 miles away from him. She concealed nothing, and yet he could no more see her naked soul than he could tear the veils of a shadow from the mountains. Not that the doctor phrased his emotions in words. He was only conscious of a sense of awe and the necessity of silence. A strange feeling for the doctor. He came from the region of the mind where that which is not spoken does not exist. And now this girl was carrying him swiftly away from hypothesis, doubts, polysyllabic speech into the world of what? The spirit? The doctor did not know. He only felt that he was about to step into the unknown, and it held for him the fascination of the suspended action of a statue. Let it not be thought that he calmly accepted the sheer necessity for silence. He fought against it, but no words came. It was evening. The rolling hills about them were already dark. Only the heads of the mountains took the day, and now they paused at the top of a rise, and the girl pointed across the holler. There we are, she said. It was a tall clump of trees through which broke the outlines of a two-storied house, larger than anything the doctor had seen in the mountain desert. And outside the trees lay long sheds, a great barn, a widespread wilderness of corrals. It struck the doctor with its apparently limitless capacity for housing man and beast. Coming in contrast with the rock-strewn desolation of the plains, this was a great establishment. The doctor had ridden out with this waif of the desert, and she had turned into a princess at a stroke. Then, for the first time since they left Elkhead, he remembered with a start that he was to care for a sick man in that house. You were to tell me, he said, something about the sickness of your father, the background behind his condition. But we've both forgotten about it. Yeah, I've been thinking how I could describe it every moment of the ride, she answered. Then, as the gloom fell more thickly around them every moment, she swerved her horse over to the mare, as if it were necessary that she read the face of the doctor while she spoke to him. 6 months ago, she said, my father was robust and active in spite of his age. He was cheerful, busy, and optimistic, but he fell into a decline. It has not been a sudden sapping of his strength. If it were that I should not worry so much, I'd attribute it to disease. But every day something of vitality goes from him. He is fading almost from hour to hour, as slowly as the hour hands of a clock. You can't really notice the change, but every 12 hours the hands make a complete revolution. It's as if his blood was evaporating, and nothing we can do will supply him with fresh strength. Is this attended by irritability? He's perfectly calm, and he seems to have no care for what becomes of him. Well, has he lost interest in the things which formerly attracted and occupied him? Yes, he minds nothing now. He has no care for the condition of the cattle, or for profit or loss in the sales. He simply stepped out of our employment. Ah, the gradual diminution of the faculties of attention. In a way, yes, but also he is more alive than he's ever been. He seems to hear with uncanny distinctness, for instance. The doctor frowned. I was inclined to attribute his decline to the operation of old age, he remarked, but this is unusual. This inner acuteness is accompanied by no particular interest in any one thing. As she did not reply for the moment, he was about to accept the silence for acquiescence. But then, through the dimness, he was arrested by the luster of her eyes, and fixed, apparently, far beyond him. One thing, she said at length. Yes, there is one thing in which he retains an interest. The doctor nodded brightly. Good, he said, and that... The silence fell again. But this time he was more roused, and he fixed his eyes keenly upon her through the gloom. She was deeply troubled. One hand gripped the horn of her saddle strongly. Her lips had parted, and she was like one who endures inescapable pain. He could not tell whether it was the slight breeze which disturbed her blouse or the rapid panting of her breath. Of that, she said, it is hard to speak. It's useless to speak. Surely not, protested the doctor. The cause, my dear madame, though perhaps apparently remote from the immediate issue, is of the utmost significance in diagnosis. She broke in rapidly. This is all I can tell you. He is waiting for something which will never come. He has missed something from his life which will never come back into it. Then why should we discuss what it is that he has missed. "Ah, to the critical mind," replied the doctor calmly, and he automatically adjusted his glasses closer to his eyes. "Nothing is without significance." "It is nearly dark," she exclaimed hurriedly. "Let us ride on." "First," he suggested, "I must tell you that before I left Elkhead, I heard a hint of some remarkable story concerning a man and a horse and a dog. Is there anything—" But it seemed that she did not hear. He heard a sharp, low exclamation which might have been addressed to her horse, and the next instant she was galloping swiftly down the slope. The doctor followed as fast as he could, jouncing in the saddle, till he was quite out of breath.